is the ventricle, and here's a tricuspid valve. And the interatrial septum was where the arrow indicates, so it's not in the view, but the arrow is pointing to where it is. And then this is inside the atrium. And so this cusp, the one associated with the interatrial septum, and the interventricular septum as well, is the septal cusp, also called the medial cusp. And then we have the anterior cusp and the posterior cusp of the tricuspid valve as well. So now there are multiple areas where I could ask the tricuspid valve. So this is another. Now I'm not going to ask the tricuspid valve 3 or 4 times, but I will ask it at least once. And this is another place where I could ask the tricuspid valve.
Professor, in the dark, the cavity. What was that one more time?
In there.
Yep.
So here we are superior, looking down into an atrium from superior, and the valve, the atrioventricular valve, is down at the bottom of the atrium, and then here the valve is open, and you're looking down into the ventricle. So that's the lumen of the ventricle down over there. Okay. Then here, now this is an important screen. This is the one where I will ask the pulmonary semilunar valve and the aortic semilunar valve. Okay. And now anterior or ventral is here, and dorsal is here. So here we have the base of the pulmonary trunk, and here we have the base of the ascending aorta. And there is a semilunar valve at each of those locations. So here's the base of the pulmonary trunk. Here's the semilunar valve found at the base of the pulmonary trunk. And now both of these valves have 3 cusps. In both valves, there's a left cusp and a right cusp. But in the pulmonary semilunar valve, it's left, right, and anterior for the cusps. So just note that there's a left cusp and a right cusp and an anterior cusp. Whereas in the aortic semilunar valve, it's left, right, and posterior. So I will ask the 2 valves. I will probably choose to ask the semilunar valves on this screen. This one shows it the best advantage. Or in the drawing that I gave out in class. I want to comment on what I could ask about that drawing also on the test. And note the valvular sinuses in the valves that I mentioned in class that I showed on the wet stuff. Each of these valves has a cavity in it called the valvular sinus. And I discussed how that works. I don't want to repeat that discussion right now because I want to concentrate on pointing out the highlights on these screens. But remember what I said about that. If you want me to talk about that later on, I can do that. What I said about how these valves work. You should know how all the valves work. And just to emphasize that, I'm asking all 4 valves, the 2 semilunar valves and both of the atrioventricular valves. And for those, I'm likely to ask the short take on function for part B, as stated in the text handout. So, the short take on function for the pulmonary semilunar valve is permits blood to flow from the right ventricle to the pulmonary trunk, but prevents backflow from the pulmonary trunk back into the ventricle, prevents reflux. And then the aortic semilunar valve prevents blood to flow from the left ventricle into the ascending aorta, but prevents backflow from the ascending aorta back into the left ventricle when it's working properly. Okay. And then notice the mitral valve over here with the anterior and posterior cusps. So this is still another place where I could ask the mitral valve. And notice the superior vena cava. This is a good place for asking it. Then here's this one does show the pulmonary and the aortic semilunar valves. This aortic semilunar valve is a little chopped up. This isn't the best view of these valves. This is better. So I'm not going to ask pulmonary and aortic semilunar valves on this one. I would use this one. This is much better. Also note the ostia, this ostium for the right coronary artery, which is opening from the valvular sinus of the right cusp of the aortic valve. And then think back to what I said about how this works, about when systole occurs in the cardiac vessels, whereas in contrast to how when systole occurs in the rest of the circulation, because it's different. I don't want to repeat that discussion right now, but I could do it after other things are done today. So on this one, what I could ask are the cusps of the tricuspid valve and the cusps of the bicuspid valve. This is an alternative use. This is still another view. These valves show pretty well. These don't. I would ask these on the preview screen. These show well on a number of screens, but this is an alternative view though, because in this one over here,
What is he asking?
you see them in a frontal section of the heart, whereas in this one, you see them in a transverse section, horizontal section, right in the plane, passing through both of the atrioventricular valves. So this is in a different plane. Now, this is an exceptionally good medical image. I'm going to ask questions. It's hard to say how anybody could improve on this one. So you should know the chambers of the heart that show, but also this is particularly
It
good
is.
over here.
196
You
at the bottom.
see the ascending aorta and the arch of the aorta, and then from proximal to distal, on the cranial side of the arch, you see the brachiocephalic trunk, or you can also say brachiocephalic artery, or right brachiocephalic artery for that matter, because it's possible to have a left brachiocephalic artery. It's one of the minority variations on that sheet, that sheet that I handed out in my drawings of the 5 possible patterns of branching from the aortic arch. One of them includes a left brachiocephalic artery. And then here's the left common carotid artery, and there's the left subclavian artery. So those may be asked more than once. So I may ask them in other views, but also they can get asked 3 times, because I would say the probability is 1.0 that I will ask all of this in the wet stuff too. And then I can ask it all on this screen, and there are some other screens that show this as well, but in different perspectives. And then pay attention to the superior vena cava and so on over here. And I'm not going to ask ribs. I could ask ribs, but the probability that I'm going to ask ribs is really low. This is an interesting view of ribs, cutting this kind of section. And they'll turn up in Bio 10, where I will ask them. But since we're past the osteology, it's not likely that I'll ask ribs in this. But it is, the probability that I'm going to ask this is 1.0, and then I might ask chambers of the heart and superior vena cava, things like that also. But this has the highest probability of being asked on this screen, and also the ascending aorta over here, as well as the arch of the aorta. And then here is a view of a horizontal section through the body, right at the point where these vessels are coming off the aortic arch. This is on page 202. So we have the aortic arch over here. So I might repeat on this one because the view is very different. This is already similar to views you get in the sections in Bio 10. This might repeat in Bio 10, but in a slightly different version. So you should know the branching over here, as stated in the atlas, with the brachiocephalic artery and the left common carotid artery and the left subclavian artery. This is the majority pattern, as you see it in the majority pattern. And then you should also know the trachea and the esophagus. Here's the trachea and the esophagus. And I might ask blood vessels over here, but it's less likely. But there's a very high probability that I will ask this. And then maybe these also, the trachea and the esophagus. There's a lower probability that I will ask these vessels. So the probability that I will ask a vertebral body over here of a thoracic vertebrae is extremely low. It's not likely that I will revert to asking questions on bones on this test. But, so you can regard that as a low probability, as a question item. And then, on page 197, there's this view of the carina, plus other stuff. You know, I think that okay, so there's also this kind of branching on that page, similar to this, but then they include the carina.
That page said 203.
It's on 197.
Is that on page?
Yes, what it
Yeah.
is.
This is on page 197, isn't it? This is on page 197. And page 197 also includes something similar to this, right?
Similar, but not that.
I like this view of this better.
It's actually on to
That
it.
is on page 203.
Yeah.
That view is on page
So I am
203.
going to use, I'll get to this in a moment. I'm going to use this branching of the trachea and the bronchi on page 203, but I'm going to use this view of the carina, which is the only place it's shown in the atlas, on page 197. So this is something that you can only see when looking from superior to inferior. This is what's called the anatomical view, because in the radiographic view, you're normally looking from inferior towards superior, but you can't see the carina in the radiographic view. So the trachea would be here, you know, above the plane of the screen, or anterior to it, and here, the primary bronchi, or main stem bronchi, as many pulmonologists call them, are branching from the trachea. So the trachea would be extending out of the screen over here. This is at the branching, and then there's the carina. That ridge in between the two primary bronchi. I'm an anatomist, I like to call them primary bronchi, but many pulmonologists will say main stem bronchi. You can also say that. So you should know this view, and it also turns up in Bio 10. In a slightly different version. Then you should know the main branching here. You don't have to know all of the subsidiary branching, but on this, you should know the trachea and the primary bronchi, or you can say main stem bronchi. And then the trachea gives rise, in most cases, to just one left primary bronchus and one right primary bronchus. You don't have to say which is left and which is right. And then each of those there's one for each lung in most people. Some people have an extra primary bronchus going to a particular lung that's called a supernumerary primary bronchus. That doesn't show here though. The vast majority of people don't have that. So we'll just stick with what the majority shows, which is what this shows. Here's the trachea, and then it branches to give rise to primary bronchus. And the carina is right over here. That's where it's located. And then there's one of these for each lung. And then within a lung, secondary bronchi branch off, one for each lobe. And then within a lobe, so you can see this maybe better on this side. So here's a primary bronchus on this side. Here are secondary bronchi, one for each lobe. Then within a lobe, there is subsidiary branching going to the divisions of lobes called segments. So I prefer to call them tertiary bronchi, but many pulmonologists will say segmental bronchi. The lobes are partitioned by sheets of connective tissue into segments. Okay. So there's one of these tertiary bronchi for each segment, and then after that, within a segment, there are quaternary bronchi, then fifth level and sixth level and so on, till you get down to bronchioles. I won't ask you to identify anything past tertiary bronchi. So here we have primary bronchi. The carina is here. And then secondary bronchi, one for each lobe. And the tertiary bronchi, one for each segment within a lobe. Okay. Then on this one, you should know the gallbladder. I probably will just ask it as a whole, whether it's asking fundus of the gallbladder and clotting of the gallbladder. And then you should know the cystic duct, the common